Welcome to Occult Cases, Episode 2. Is Bigfoot real? That's a very interesting question. Not because of the amount of stories or people trying to find the beast, but because it was a real species of animal that lived on this planet 100,000 years ago. The Gigantopithecus, a tooth fossil found in China in a china shop, which led to finding a full jawbone. From that jawbone, they were able to tell that this was a 10-foot creature that stood on two hind legs and walked upright. Even though this was all they found in the Asian region, it was just over 10,000 years ago the Bering Land Bridge melted. For those of you who don't know, the Bering Land Bridge was a stretch of land between Siberia and Alaska. This was a route many large mammals tend to migrate. After the last ice age melted, it buried the Bering Land Bridge under the ocean. Some say that's where a majority of the woolly mammoths were buried. Now that being said, it was completely possible a small amount of Gigantopithecus crossed and made North America their home. It's hard to believe something can stay hidden in the vast forests of North America. But if you've ever seen or have ever been in a place like Alaska or the northern British Columbia to Ontario, there's brush so thick you could lose your car and easily park like 20 feet away. Ontario alone is 87% crown land with over 9.5 million hectares of protected lands. Ontario also has the highest population in Canada with some of the biggest cities in Canada. Lots of room for a species to hide in there. But what troubles me is the lack of evidence. With the technology we have today, I have a hard time swallowing the fact that the best evidence we have was the Patterson video from the late 60s, where Bigfoot looks more like he's late for work than walking, casually through a forest. Game trail cameras are everywhere, and so many hunters use them. I've seen so many freaky photos from them, but so far, almost all of them have been explained. I've heard a theory that game cameras put on an energy which scares the creature away. If this was a species of an animal, would it not be curious of the camera? And would not people put the same energy out? So why would it just walk up to people to be able to tell their stories, but not walk up to cameras? Joe Rogan went to look for a Bigfoot on a show called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. He gave up and declared that Bigfoot isn't real. He also happened to meet a lot of crazy people that put him down kind of the wrong pathway, I think. I want to continue down this road and find out for myself. Up next is my interview with Keenan. He's a real Bigfoot enthusiast, also skeptic and a Canadian veteran. He had an experience that led to his research. So let's hear from our first guest ever on a show, and I'm proud to have it as a Canadian veteran. Here's Keenan. All right, so welcome to the show. I have Keenan here. He is a Sasquatch enthusiast at Alberta Sasquatch Organization. Anyone who wants to look it up, it's sasquatchalberta.com. Keenan, how you doing today?
Hey, not too bad. How are you?
Great. So for everyone at home who doesn't know much about your organization, can you tell us a little more about how it started and what it's about?
Yeah, so the Alberta Sasquatch Organization has actually been around for over a decade, but as it exists right now in this iteration, we've only been doing this for about 2 years. It's a whole new group of people that took it over and decided to modernize it and bring it in the 21st century and put forward a more valiant effort to document the history of history of sightings here in Alberta for Sasquatch and Sasquatch activity. They go back to the 19th century, and so we wanted to make that information available for people online and through a number of public speaking events. And we've been pretty busy over the last couple of years.
Okay, so where do you guys get all your claims from and all your stories and everything?
Okay, so when we first started off, we ended up actually having about 30 reports from a combination of the now defunct Western Canadian Sasquatch Research Organization, or the WCRSO, and also from the old Sasquatch Alberta website. And then on top of that, we've aggregated, with permission, a number of reports from a few websites on the internet which have either now disappeared or have Sasquatch reports from Alberta, but they're non-regional specific.
Okay, yeah, because I noticed that there are some from like even the 70s and stuff like that, so obviously you can't verify things like that. But
Yeah.
so, anyways, what got you interested in the Bigfoot in the first place?
Well, for me, I guess it's a bit of a childhood fascination that goes back to when I was quite a bit younger. I think I had an interest in all things that were unusual or paranormal, supernatural, things like that. Everything, that used to fit into that boat back then, like UFOs, Sasquatch, ghosts, and things like that. But it's always sort of sat in the back of my mind, and the specific topic of Sasquatch never really came up until I had an unexplained, you can call it an encounter or situation back in 2017 when I was fly fishing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Okay. Well, in that case, I was fly fishing with one other friend. We'd gone out on a Thursday night. It was the day before official fly fishing season opened up Alberta wide here in the province. So this would have been about the third week of June. And we got there on the Thursday night with the intention that the rest of our friends, as they finished work on Friday, would come out and join us. And so this is out in the eastern slope of the Rockies, near the Livingstone Fire Base. And there's a popular campground around there too that a lot of people might be familiar with, called Dutch Creek Campground.
Okay.
And but we were in the PLUZ, the Public Land Use Zone. So that's just random camping. So you can camp on Crown land at no fee, and you can build your own fire pit and things like that. So you just carve out a little nook off the highway. And so that's what we were doing. We had got there early with everyone's tents and equipment. We'd set it all up. And we ended up having supper there, and then we just had like a quiet night kind of around the campfire talking amongst ourselves. And then we both went to ground. So my friend had set up a big 6-person tent or whatever, probably 25 yards away from me, so quite a ways away. And then I had set mine up a little bit closer to the road that we had driven in on. And just to set the scene a little bit for you too as well, we were out there by ourselves. When you set up on crown land like this, you typically don't have any neighbors around you for either several hundred meters or several kilometers. And since we were out there on a Thursday night, there was nobody else out there. And so it was a pretty quiet night. We went to sleep around 11, like I said, and around 3:30 in the morning, pretty pitch blackout, but really quiet. I woke up in the middle of the night because, I was sleeping in a one-man tent, and something had come up to my tent and grabbed me through the material of the tent. So it had pressed down through the material of the tent with a hand with fingers, a massive hand, like the size of a frying pan, and it grabbed my head. It grabbed my head with a grip, so not like a paw coming through and patting my head. It was something with a massive palm and fingers. And then I woke up, obviously, and so because it's a one-man shelter, I couldn't stand up or sit up. I can only semi-recline up into like a on my elbows kind of position. And so when I did that, the hand withdrew, and then there was like, I don't know, maybe about 10 seconds of silence, 12 seconds of silence. And then the hand came back through the tent and it grabbed my head again with a grip. So there's no claws that puncture through the material. It's not, like an oval or circular pattern like a bear's front paw.
Yeah.
It was a hand, a massive hand with fingers. And so the fingers were, from what I can remember too, because this is a couple of years ago. And I think with memories like this too, the fine detail starts to blur unless you write it down.
Well, of course.
And and from what I remember, the fingers were splayed, so they're not together. So in like a cupped fashion, they were splayed out, so I could feel these individual fingers. And the crazy part about it is that the wrist would articulate. And so it's my understanding that a bear can't articulate its wrist fully. Like, so it's, for example, if you or me were to stick our hand out, we could articulate our wrist 90 degrees to the right or 90 degrees to the left. And that's what this was doing, while also kind of they call it palpating. You kind of like I would compare it to like when you put your hand into a backpack and you're trying to feel for an object that you're trying to pull out, you're feeling around to figure out what something is. That's kind of what happened to me. And that happened for, I don't know, it felt like forever, but probably only for about 15 or 20 seconds, but that's still quite a bit of a long time. And I was fully awake this time. The one that woke me up, I probably could have convinced myself that nothing, that it was nothing. But the second time it came through, I was fully alert and awake. And so it felt around my head for a while, and then I jerked my head forward, and then the palm or the hand let go. And after that, in the pitch darkness and in the still of the night, I didn't hear anything. Like I didn't hear anything move off. Nothing was pawing at my tent, clawing at
Yeah.
my tent. There was nothing sniffing around. It was just silence. So I sat there awake until probably about 5:45 in the morning when the light came up. It is June, so the sun comes up pretty early. But I just sat there awake for the rest of the night, and I felt pretty vulnerable too because I didn't have a knife with me. I didn't have a firearm. I didn't have
Oof.
even have bear spray. The only thing I had with me was the key fob for my vehicle. So
Yeah.
I had my thumb on the panic button. So I thought to myself like, well, if something grabs me again, I'm going to push the panic button on this. I was actually kind of cautious and somewhat embarrassed about it too because I was thinking like, okay, if I push this panic button, my friend's going to wake up and he's going to run out of his tent too, right? To see what's going on. And I felt like that wasn't going to be a very fair situation to him. He was either going to turn out badly because we had an animal or something like that
Oh yeah, it could
in the
scare
camp.
something or.
Yeah, but that was my only option. So I sat there till morning came, and then I got out of my tent, um, and yeah, actually, what got me to get out of my tent was that when first light came up, my buddy also got out of his tent,
Mhm.
and as soon as he got out, then I got the courage to step out and see what was going on. I should also mention too, like while this whole incident was happening, and I was sitting there in my tent, my friend has sleep apnea, so I could hear him snoring the whole time. So I know it wasn't him. And so the other thing, like I originally thought, you know, before my mind jumped to Sasquatch or anything like that, was I thought either A, we had an animal come through, or B, we had a person come through. But one of the things that is possible to happen out there too is you go to sleep and then someone pulls into a camping area near to you, but there was no
Yeah.
one else there. Yeah, no one else was there, and we didn't hear any vehicles pull in or anything like that. And none of our valuables were stolen. Like we had three, you know, $700 fly rods sitting out on our 6 foot folding table.
Hmm.
Nothing was taken. Fly vests, wading gear, all of that stuff. Nothing that we had of any value was taken, or well, nothing was taken. And I thought too, like, okay, well, if it's an animal, um, you know, we look well. What we did was instead of hanging our food in a tree, we put it in behind the tailgate of my truck in the bed,
Okay.
and we had a folding cover. So we figured, okay, well, this is as close to a bear-proof container as we're going to have. So when we drove into this location too, we drove in on a dirt road, a really dusty dirt road,
Yeah.
and so my vehicle was 360 degrees covered in this like fine trail dust. And so we figured, okay, or well, I figured, I didn't say anything to my friend about it at this point. I went and I checked my vehicle because I figured if there was anything that came into the campsite and they were looking for food, they were going to go up to the tailgate of my truck and
Oh,
I'd
of course.
find
Yeah.
the rubbings of fur or something like that against the tailgate because that's where all the meat and stuff was. It was just on the other side of the tailgate, but nothing disturbed my truck. And
Hmm.
then I also realized too, like, oh shit, we screwed up last night. We left out some cooking utensils that had food residue in them,
Hmm.
like a cast iron pan and spatula, some tongs, things like that. None of that stuff was disturbed either. So no alcohol was taken, no food was taken, no none of our valuables were disturbed. And so that was a pretty unnerving thing, and it was even more terrifying at the time because like I said, I didn't hear anything move off. So as far as I knew, whatever it was that grabbed my head was just standing there all night long. So I don't have a memory of anything leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't sound like a bear because a bear usually likes to just step on and press onto something that they want to eat, and usually if they're gripping, there's going to be claws involved. So, and there's no claws involved, like getting scratched or anything. So, wow,
Yeah.
that's
uh,
huh,
yeah,
that's pretty crazy.
it was pretty weird. Like nothing punctured the material of the tent. It was pretty loose, like it's a little one-man shelter. It's not like
Yeah.
a big tent. Oh, and there's one other thing I forgot too. So when my friend woke up in the morning, the first thing he said to me was, "What were you doing walking around my tent all last night?"
Oh.
Yeah, so what he did was he had a bigger tent, and his tent was so big that he had been able to inflate a queen size mattress in the middle of it. So he was sleeping in the middle of a giant tent on a queen size mattress and with like tight tent material, right? So nothing was going
Yeah.
to come through, push the material, and be able to reach him. But with me, like my head was right against the material of the tent, and Yeah, so that was an interesting experience. He'd taken his tent. Sorry, I didn't finish that. He pushed his tent up against the shrubbery on the edge of this campsite that we chosen. So he had knee-high scrub on three edges of his tent, and then the front door was facing towards the campfire. And that was the only side. So if anything was walking around behind his tent, it had to walk through knee-high scrub. So that's how I got
Yeah.
the impression. And I just told him, like, I don't know, we must have had an animal come through last night. We'll have to be a little bit more cautious tonight before we go to bed.
Big animal if it's big enough to grab your head, though. That's the crazy part.
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure if you've ever had a chance to see these cast impressions of Sasquatch handprints. I think I've got one or two photos of them, and they are absolutely massive. I don't know how else to describe it other than like frying pan sized, or bigger than a catcher's mitt, like a baseball catcher's mitt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what solidified it for me, because the one thing about all that paranormal stuff, ghosts, UFOs, whatever you lump into that category, it all felt kind of intangible, or it felt dangerous to go looking for it.
Yeah.
So, for example, with things like UFOs and stuff like that, like, what do you do to research that? And so that stuff never, kind of entered my mind. But then you have an experience like this that's kind of ambiguous, but it could be Sasquatch, I suppose. Once you come to believe that they're a real creature living out in the woods, just doing their thing, then why couldn't it be that? So I don't say that I've had a for sure Sasquatch encounter, but I've had an experience in the woods
Absolutely.
that I can't explain. So that's kind of what pushed me forward. And then I teamed up with some of these guys, like Justin, Rob, Raymond, Josh, and a few other guys too. And we go out from time to time, but the main focus still is on collecting stories and listening to people's encounters. And so since we've launched the website back in 2016, I think we've been able to collect about 32 encounters. So on average, on average, we're talking to between 12 and 15 people per year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the impression you get off these people? Like, do you think like most of them are legit, or?
Yeah, and yeah, actually, I think the vast majority of the people that I've talked to are pretty legitimate. One of the strange things that I've come to realize over the last couple of years too is one of the best ways to approach it, which is a little bit different than a lot of people, was to start at a point of, or from a point of either not necessarily full belief in what their story is, but like, I don't know, kind of compassionate, or being compassionate towards them, because in a lot of cases they're pretty frightened about what happened, being respectful, understanding, listen to what they have to say, and kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, and just listen to it, because at the end of the day, all it is a story, and it doesn't necessarily influence me one way or another, but it gives them an opportunity to speak to someone about their experiences, kind of get that off their chest. And in a lot of cases, I think the worst thing that's happened is I've met a few people where by the end of my interview or second interview or third interview with them, I was convinced that maybe they hadn't seen a Sasquatch, but in their minds they have, and I wasn't going to change their mind about it, and there was no reason for me to fight them about it.
Of course, yeah.
So it was more of just, okay, just listen to the story, accept it for what it is, and then move on.
Okay. No, that's one thing I've always found fascinating about it. Was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what is it called? Oh, I don't want to botch this. The Gigantopithecus. It's an actual real creature. They originally found a tooth in China, in a China shop, which led them to find a full jawbone, which led to them finding it was a real creature that lived in Asia 100,000 years ago, that stood on its hind legs, and they claimed this is a real Bigfoot. And then interesting I found about it is the fact that it lived there during the Bering land bridge. That's where a huge migratory route was for a lot of large mammals, where they claimed the woolly mammoth may have been lost there. So it's very it's very possible for that thing to cross the Bering Land Bridge during that time and then get lost. There's the forest in North America is massive. Like, I come from Ontario, and I believe it's 85% of that is Crown land, and so that's just, you can get lost in that so easy, 20 yards away, like not a problem. So that's what I find very interesting, and I'd love to find more proof. Is there anything else? Have you actually found your own footprints or anything like that, or just have you just heard stories, or?
No, we found footprints as well. Here in Alberta, it's really hard to collect footprints. The substrate that we have here on the forest floor in Alberta, as you're aware, is not exactly conducive to leaving footprints. We have a lot of hard packed terrain, shale, rock, stubble, river rock. What else? And then in the fall we have leaf covered ground. So the only time that we really have a fighting chance of finding footprints, which again would be harder to cast, are in the winter months. So right now, where you have, anywhere from 6 inches of snow all the way up to 3 feet of snow, and it's also kind of nice too because with the leaves off the ground and then buried below the snow, you start to get more of a clear field of view as you go out. And the nice thing too about the winter months is that you get a little bit less human activity. It tends to be more concentrated on uh, uh, things like skiing, snowboarding, and then a lot of the casual backpacking, hiking, and stuff like that is kind of taken out of the picture. But as far as the footprints, sorry, I kind of digress there. We did find an entire trackway back in January of this year. Actually, it was our first trackway that we found, and unfortunately, too, that was uh, west. Well, it's close to Edson, so west of Edmonton, there, closer to Edson. And we'd gone out to a private property where the homeowner was experiencing nightly activity after having a visual encounter. So he had bought the property, several acres, in a very private area. And within a couple of months of moving in, he started having inexplicable activity. And but the main thing that kicked that off was having a visual encounter. So he was pacing his driveway at night smoking, and he ended up bumping into one face to face, a big one. And that was on a Monday. Justin had the opportunity to get out on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and they looked at the footprints that led from across the road onto the property, over the fence, and out to the edge where he actually had the encounter. And so in total there was probably over, I don't know, either in the teens of footprints or in the low 20s. But there was quite a bit of, even though the footprints were in the snow, there was quite a bit of plus-degree weather. So some of the detail had been washed out. Fortunately, the homeowner did take a few photos of it when he first discovered them. Yeah, it was pretty interesting because from what we could tell, the length of the foot and the proportions were all correct. The stride length was appropriate, and the way that it cleared obstacles made sense. Even like the pattern of the footfalls, left, right, all made sense based off of other anecdotal information that we believe we understand about Sasquatch.
Okay. Crazy.
Yeah.
So is there an area that's you'd find more sightings at all, or is it maybe close to the mountains or anything, or more north, or?
So that's the interesting thing is if you take a look on the SasquatchAlberta.com website, there's a link you can click called sightings map. And so I've dropped a pin on a map, a Google Earth map actually, of every visual sighting that we found here in Alberta. And that goes including historical reports. And if you take a look at that, you'll find that really sightings in Alberta don't cluster very well. As long as there's continuous wood line from the mountains, there and it's accessible, yeah, you'll find it. So we have reports from areas like Lac La Biche or even close to Lloydminster, so along the eastern edge of the province, a fair bit throughout the northern part of the province in the Peace region, and then we have tons of reports all the way down the eastern slope of the Rockies, from Jasper all the way down to Waterton. So they're extremely distributed, and they don't cluster very well. They don't cluster very well by location, but the one thing I can say with a pretty high degree of certainty, at least looking back at the data we have, is that the sightings cluster really well by season. So the majority of the sightings actually come from the fall, so closer to around hunting season, and then they continue on right through to the early spring. So I'd say late March or early April.
Okay, so right now would be actually a good time to see if get a sighting. Possibly.
Yeah, I actually like to think that October is probably one of the pretty prime times to see them. I think some of the more compelling encounters that I've heard from Albertans here actually come from November and from March.
Okay. I also noticed on your website that you actually have a military background. What was your military background?
So when I first started off, I started off actually in the reserve as well as in university. And then after I completed university, I ended up going full time. And I did do one deployment of Afghanistan actually in the middle of my university degree. So I started off in reserve field artillery, and then I later went into psychological operations and did that till I retired.
Oh, thank you for your service. I did 4 years as a combat engineer myself, so I know it's like so. Anyways, any upcoming? Pardon me?
To be stuck out there, yeah. Were you in Gagetown there, or?
I was, yes. I was posted out in Gagetown, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I got some good memories from there too.
One big swamp.
Yeah.
So, is there any upcoming Bigfoot expeditions you guys are going to be doing anytime soon, or?
Well, I'm not too certain. One of the things I kind of felt bad about is I ended up advertising on the website for a second year in a row that we would do 2 trips this year, and we actually only ended up doing 1. So I do have a MailChimp or email list, I guess, that people have signed up for. I got to send those guys an update too to let them know that we probably won't have a chance to make it out until probably early 2020. We have a few private initiatives that we want to put forward between now and Christmas, and that include a couple of different areas of interest, both southwest and northwest of Calgary. And so we're going to put the focus on that, and we'll try to make at least one public trip available probably around July again next year.
Okay, sounds great. So we're going to wrap it up this interview. And last thing I really want to ask you, so do you believe in Bigfoot then?
Actually, I think at this point it's pretty comfortable for me to say yes, and that's not just based off of my personal experiences of the people that I've talked to. I believe that there is actually pretty good physical evidence for such a creature to exist. And if you ever get a chance to go to the 90-minute speaking series that Dr. Jeff Meldrum puts on, because he lays out a very coherent and linear, logical argument for the existence of the species over the course of 90 minutes, where he offers up not just 1 or 2 paths towards how that could possibly exist, but he gives you different layers of how all of the evidence stacks up together to form a very clear picture of a living, breathing biological creature.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. So is there anything you want to give a shout out to? Anything coming up you want to announce or anything?
Yeah, so if you guys want to get a hold of us, you guys can reach us at sasquatchalberta.com, and then also check out Mountain Beast Mysteries. That's our friend Justin. Mountain Beast Mysteries on YouTube.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Keenan. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Problem. Yeah, you too, buddy.
All right.